Hello and welcome to the Two Real Cinema Club. I'm James Rosica.
And my name is Andres Lorente. And every week on the Two Real Cinema Club, we watch a couple of movies, and then we kind of ruin them for your enjoyment because we just talk and talk, trying to compare them. But I did think of there's a sort of metaphor that emerged this week. I feel like we are sort of like those restaurateurs who curate these splendid meals for you by pairing, I don't know, pan-fried soy Brussels sprouts and with a New World white Bordeaux, and then we serve up a seafood risotto with the Old Vine Zinfandel. But then, sadly, we are also those restaurant critics who are really bitter, and then we basically make you never want to eat those things again. Or you don't even want to hear the word pairing ever again, or curate.
But I feel like, this week we have paired, a fine wine from one of the finest cellars in the Western world, and opened it to drink it with a burger and fries, haven't we?
Yes, it's exactly what we've done. Oh, should we apologize in advance, perhaps? I don't know.
So, true to our new mission statement, it's all about the animals. So we have watched two bear movies this week. It's all about the bears. We have watched Cocaine Bear, which is like Paddington with an X certificate, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then we're comparing that to Grizzly Man, the Werner Herzog film. Before we talk about those, let's quickly do the socials because we have to. So as always, you can find us on Twitter. We are Two Real Cine Club at twitter.com. You can find us on Instagram at Two Real Cinema Club at instagram.com. You can read our blog at tworealcinemaclub.com. Put something about Ratatouille on that this week. You can email us at tworealcinemaclub@gmail.com. And you can just plain tell your friends. That's what social networking used to be, talking. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts, and on YouTube as well. So we're covering all the bases. If you enjoy the show, please tell your friends. If you don't enjoy the show, keep it to yourself.
I like that. Please don't tell anyone how much you didn't enjoy it. Tell them how much you did. Oh boy.
So you've drawn the short straw.
Yeah. Let's. I don't mean to rush you or anything like that, but let's try to spend very little time on Cocaine Bear so that we can spend a lot of time on Grizzly Man.
Grizzly Man. Cocaine Bear.
Yeah.
What's the story?
Let's just do it. Yeah. Cocaine Bear was directed by Elizabeth Banks. Features a number of actors you would recognize. Matthew Rhys is there, Kerry Russell, Ray Liotta, Margot Martindale, and many others. Lots of others. $35 million. And yeah, the bear is there, and that's pretty impressive, but I don't know where the $35 million went, honestly, on this film. So CGI is expensive. It also seems like a great way to launder money if you just say, oh, well, we gotta make a bear. Geez, sorry, here we go. I really don't want to spend too much time here, so I'll stop talking about how much I don't want to talk about the film and start talking about the film, which centers around a very high on cocaine pilot who dumps many duffel bags of cocaine over a state park in Tennessee. And it's a very strange thing because it's a suicide mission or something. Like he's flying, he's high, he's totally coked up, and he starts dumping the cocaine, and he's going to leave the plane. And it's kind of, I guess, that the plane is just going to crash and he doesn't survive. But Matthew Rhys he overacts from the outset, and it doesn't bode well for the whole film. I am of the belief that you get a pretty good feeling of the film from the very first minute, the very first seconds, and it's just that I think everything's going to be overacted and just not realistic. And of course, a bear that uses a lot of cocaine is not realistic to begin with, but the premise was promising, I thought. So he's presumably going to fall to his death as he does. The plane crashes and they discover him and they discover some cocaine. And there's this idea, of course, that all this cocaine is in the woods of this park. I don't know if it's a national park or state park. I think it's in Georgia, but I thought it was in Tennessee. But anyway, point is all sorts of duffel bags full of cocaine in a park. And the hunt for the cocaine is on. The first the first victims or the first people to encounter the cocaine bear are Elsa and is it Chris? Who's the I forget what the name of the her partner is. They're a European couple. Elsa's Elsa's going to be the first one who gets killed and eaten up by this bear, but they're a European couple. They're hiking, and they're the first ones who sort of get to experience the bear very, very high on drugs. So they don't find the cocaine, but the bear has already found it.
I like your description there. European couple. That's like I almost feel like that's what they were called in the script. It's like it's not completely clear what country they're from.
No, not at all. Not at all.
And they're quite comfortable talking to each other in strongly accented English.
That's right.
But it's
Danish, German. Oh no, they're European hike. I think European hikers is the key. And boy, the cliche squad's going to have some work to do with them later on. Anyway, Elsa meets a very violent end. Her partner, her husband, he disappears for a while, but he will return. Ray Liotta's character is, and this is his last credited film. I think he's going to have 3. If IMDb is correct, he might have 3 posthumously released films. But here he's sort of a drug lord. He's got a claim to the coke, so he sends his grieving son, Eddie, and an associate, David, to go find the cocaine. So you've got already another group going to look for the drugs. Bob, who's a detective who wants to get the coke, he thinks it's a link to Ray Liotta, so he can maybe bust him, but he also might be just interested in picking up the coke and selling some of it on the side himself. At the visitor center in this park is Ranger Liz, played by Margot Martindale. She's sort of troubled by these young punks who are robbing the very few visitors who are in the park. It doesn't seem like a very profitable bit of thievery that they commit, but good luck to them. More power to them. She's excited by the visit of Peter, who's, I guess, a potential suitor, but he seems to be a senior park manager or a nature biologist of some sort. There's a Dusty Beaver joke directed at her, which is a bit on the nose. It was droll, but she's sort of, she's caretaking the facility.
I mean, I think that's exactly the tone of the film, isn't it? I think this is
on the nose.
It's like you were saying that early on in the film you establish, exactly what the film is going to taste like, and here it's giving you, exactly that on a plate, isn't it?
Very, it makes it very obvious what it's trying to do and what it's trying to be. There are a lot of characters, so I'm going to run down the list because all these people are looking for the bear or the cocaine, or trying to find someone looking for the bear or the cocaine. Nurse Shari's daughter, I think it's Shari, who was played by Carrie Russell. She's the daughter of Dee Dee and maybe like a middle schooler, and she and her friend sort of skip school because they want to go to the park and paint some waterfalls, so they're going to get involved with the bear. And they're actually kind of the first humans, I believe, to find some of the cocaine. They do some cocaine, the kids do, by sort of daring each other to eat small piles of it, so they're high as well. And the cocaine's also kind of getting into the air because people are ruffling around for it, and that sort of attracts the bear even more. Ranger Liz and Peter end up helping Shari look for her kids until Peter suffers a pretty grisly, excuse the pun, murder at the claws of the bear. Eddie and David, so that's Ray Liotta's son, Eddie, with David, who's sort of one of their associates. They arrive, and David confronts these park punks who've been hassling Ranger Liz a little bit. In the restroom, there's a very gory scene when they attack him and he attacks back. But it means that Eddie and David can force one of the punk, who seems to be named Kid or Stash, if you look at the credits, because the punks have already found some coke, and David and Eddie, of course, want to find it before Ray Liotta gets there.
Green Day, that's what I called them in my mind, those 3 punks. They're basically Green Day, aren't they?
Yeah, they very much are. Yeah, that's good shorthand. Very good shorthand. Detective Bob arrives. He's about at the same time that David and Eddie arrive, and he finds a load of coke on top of a gazebo. There's some gazebo jokes as well, which aren't terribly funny, but it's a nice word play or word jokery there. Basically, everyone's looking for the coke, but they're finding more bear than coke, I guess. And for me, this story is sort of spread out very thinly over too many characters. I think I've introduced everyone, and you don't need to know all the characters, but what ends up happening is that, they all have similar motivations. They either want to find another person or find some cocaine and avoid the bear, but it's sort of spread very thinly over so many characters, and they all have very simplistic backstories and motivations. So this is not a deep film. It's not a film for those who like to ponder ideas or anything like that. It is gory. It's not afraid to be even gorier. And Ray Liotta eventually arrives, and it seems like he's the one who shoots Detective Bob. Do we need to ring the bell or anything like that?
We should ring the bell now, I think. God. I think it's... Yeah, let's ring. I've got the bell here. Let's ring.
Thank you.
Spent all this money on the bell. I should really make full use of it. Here is it. Here's the spoiler bell.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, my ears. Right.
That the spoiler bell is the best part of this retelling of the film, so... I ain't going to get much better. But I was very confused because Ray Liotta seems to be the one who shoots Detective Bob. He knows where he is, but then he needs to be told by Eddie and David, hey, where's Bob? I mean, he knows. So it was sort of one of the pieces of information that we already knew. He already knew, but it cut into the script and survived somehow. Most of the survivors end up at this cave behind a very fake-looking studio waterfalls where Dee Dee, the daughter, has taken refuge, but she happens to be exactly where two baby bears are waiting for the mother. The baby CGI bears, I don't know if you noticed this, they're not nearly as convincing as the mama bear. I mean, the CGI in the mama bear is actually really good, but it almost looks like a different species. But the beauty is they sort of explain the bear's motivation to gore any and all intruders. So, we know that bears are protective, mother bears in particular, very protective of their young. So that sort of gives a motivation for the bear. Otherwise, the bear is just coked up and killing everything, which I don't think it makes as much sense. So this at least explains the motivations of the bear. I thought Liotta was actually pretty good in a part it's not a stretch for him, but he does a nice job. It's a great send-off for him because he saves some people. That's nice. But then he's actually mauled and eaten alive by baby bears, which just seems like a good Ray Liotta way to go out of the film career. So I hope this is the standout film of those other three that are forthcoming. The film doesn't come off nearly so well, though finishing with the tune White Lines by Grandmaster Flash, I thought provides some redemption, but it is a Pusha T remix of the song, and it's not as good as the original.
Yeah, it's not as good as the original.
And it didn't need to be made, which seems appropriate because this film didn't need to be made either.
I'll tell you what I really admire about this film. And it's not much, and it does feel like $35 million of slightly wasted opportunity and kind of slight first draftiness. But what I really admire is that you can pretty much learn everything you need to know about the film from the title.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be said for it. It's a high concept movie, but not only is it high concept, but that whole concept is crammed into those two words of the title.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like Snakes on a Plane, which is a movie that I've heard it compared to.
Yeah.
But you can. I think you probably get more enjoyment from hearing that there is a film called Cocaine Bear and then imagining the elaborations of the plot.
Yes.
Than seeing the film that was made with the plot that they came up with.
Yeah.
I love these films where it's all summarized in two words.
Yeah.
But I do also then love to be a little bit surprised on top of that, rather than being delivered, just the thing that was promised, but a little less well than it played in my head.
Yeah. For me, I saw the trailer probably a month or 2 months ago, and I thought, that's a great trailer. I know the film doesn't exist because it couldn't possibly be an hour and a half long. So in some ways, I was really disappointed to find out that it was a real film because I thought the trailer does look good. I thought it was a great trailer, like a jokey thing. And I wondered, wow, did they pay all those people to make a trailer? But then as a film, I don't know if it was intentionally like a B film. It actually falls short of being a B film. It's almost like a C movie because my expectations were too high. I think that's part of the problem. I thought, boy, it must be really, really clever because the trailer was really clever. And I thought, okay, this could be one of those films that's like the good bad, right? It actually ends up just being kind of the old kind of bad, the bad bad.
The bad bad.
And I think
if they told you sorry, I was just going to say, if they told you they made this film for $750,000, something like that.
Yeah.
And they called in a bunch of favors, and they managed to get Ray Liotta in it because his daughter knew somebody and she persuaded him. You kind of think, oh wow, well done, yeah. Oh, this is a blast. Oh, this is great fun. Yeah. Look at that, Cocaine Bear. But the fact that a lot of money's been spent on it, and they kind of really took it seriously.
Yeah.
makes you question, well, if they were going to spend all that money, maybe they should have done a few more drafts of the script first.
Yeah.
The script, I think, was originally a spec script written by Jimmy Warden. I don't think he's got any writing credits before. He's got a directing credit on a project coming up.
Yeah.
The thing that gave me a little bit of faith in the film is that it's produced by Phil Lord and Christopher Miller.
Okay.
They previously did the Lego Movie, which had Elizabeth Banks in as a voice actor. They previously did Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs.
Okay.
They previously did like the early work on the Han Solo movie, which had Aidan Ehrenek in. So kind of lots of connections to the cast and the talent behind this film.
Yeah.
They've clearly got a little coterie of people that they like and they've worked with and that they know. But in this case, I'm not really feeling very much of their influence.
Yeah.
And the film just feels a bit first drafty. All the way through, I was kind of feeling this could have been good.
Yeah.
It's like the ingredients are almost there.
Yeah.
Got great actors. Could we not just have elaborated and developed it just a little bit further?
Yeah.
As it is, we've got characters who've got very little inner life, and it's difficult to imagine what things they were doing before the film started somehow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kerry Russell's character is nurse, and exactly, and that's because she's nurse plus mom, and that's character, like David, who's like the drug dealing friend. He's played by an actor who is the son of Ice Cube, and he's basically playing a character out of an NWA song, isn't it? I mean, it's he does his best with the material, but the material is pretty thin.
Yeah.
Ray Liotta is full of charisma, but he's basically just he's like playing a parody of a Ray Liotta character from a sketch, isn't it? It's that's what it is.
Yeah, I think I agree with you exactly. I had much higher expectations because I like you. I think that with some time and some good writing, some imagination, this could have been a pretty funny film and a pretty good film. I think they almost get too hung up on the horror elements. It's always difficult to mix horror and comedy, and the comedy it didn't hit too much for me at all.
Yeah.
And the horror I felt was at times super gory, but I don't know. It almost had no effect. It just went right over me. It just seemed like they were going so over the top, both on the high concept and on the gore, that it just didn't really resonate. Nothing felt real or urgent to me, and I thought it could have been a lot better, and I think you're right. It's first draft at most, like it's like 0.5 draft. It just feels like they had it. They figured, we can make it good in the acting and in the filmmaking, but it was just so disappointing. I was really excited for it. I thought it was going to be great.
I wonder whether this film is a bit of a symptom of the fact that people hate to read. I think people may well have been approached with this notion of, there's a film, it's called Cocaine Bear, and that's as far as you need to go before you either get a green light or not.
Yeah.
And I think if people had really paid attention to the script, they would have noticed that. I mean, one of the problems is when you present a script to anybody, it kind of has to be 120 pages, otherwise it looks like you haven't done your work.
Oh, yeah.
So you end up with pages and pages of dialogue where David's character is worried about his clothes and his shoes looking nice.
Mm-hmm.
And he constantly has dialogue where, his shoe gets a bit dirty, and then he'll say, "Oh no, these shoes are new, and now they've got dirt on them." Or he gets stabbed through the shirt, and then there's a blood stain on the shirt, and so we've got like all this dialogue about how, "Oh man, I've been stabbed through my shirt.
Yeah.
Now the shirt has got blood stains on it. I like this shirt. I prefer it when my clothes are clean."
Yeah.
What are all these words doing? We don't need any of this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's bizarre because it's kind of characterization, but it comes off as being. It ends up. The story's so thin on story that it becomes part of the storytelling. It becomes part of the plot, and it's just, okay, we know that this is a guy who likes clean shoes and a clean shirt. You don't have to keep reminding us. And you don't even have to have him say that. You can just look at it and clean it. And you realize he's infatuated with the nicely kept clothes or something. Oh, yeah. Oh.
Do you remember in Do the Right Thing, there's a character who's always really proud of his shoes, and I think at one point, I don't know whether it's Spike Lee or one of the other characters, just steps on his shoes deliberately to make them dirty.
Yeah,
and that's a great character moment. You don't need to have people then say, "Oh my God, you stepped on my shoe.
Yeah,
dirt from your shoe got onto my shoe, and now my shoe is dirty." It's just but it feels like this is a dialogue that's been written to fill up the space, because if you write the movie Rafifi style with pure action, then you end up with a 65-page script, and no one will give you the money to make that, even though it's actually an hour and a half.
Yeah. Yeah, and the stories are thin. I think there are so many characters you don't really get attached to anyone, and you certainly don't get much of their backstories or inner thoughts, as you mentioned before. And it's funny because with that many characters, it feels like you should have a lot of story to tell, but there ain't much.
I mean, the other film it reminded me a little bit of actually is like the film from the other week, Women on the Edge of a Nervous Breakdown, which brings like a whole bunch of characters onto screen, and they've all got their own story. But there's literally 5 times as much story in that movie as there is in Cocaine Bear.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like if you had this nice cast of characters, well, then surely you're asking to create some kind of forest farce.
Yeah.
And kind of these people find a bag, and then it gets taken again by the bear, and then there's a bit of mistaken identity, and then I feel like there are so many plot points that should have just fallen out of this script.
Yeah.
And yet somehow we're left with very little. It feels kind of very thin.
Yeah, very thin.
And the kind of the cracks are papered over with some blood.
Yeah. And I think that the Matthew Rhys bit at the very outset that I mentioned, I knew it was going to be a crap film within 30 seconds, because I think just over direction, over acting, it tells you exactly where they want this film to fall, and there's just no restraint. It was crap. Can we stop talking about it, or do we have to do the other stuff?
Well, we do have to phone the Cliche Squad.
Yes, please.
God damn, I think they've hired a whole new squadron just for this film. Let's call I'm picking up the phone now. I'm going to call the Cliche Squad.
Save us.
Cliche Squad.
Do you have any specific charges for this Cliche Squad this week?
A couple. I know you do too. So I won't trot on your territory. European hikers, I think we sort of mentioned it at the beginning. That's kind of a cliche for me. Are these just Europeans who are lost in the American woods and stuff? That's a little overdone. The punk kids causing problems also for me was a bit of a cliche. But it's just odd that they're doing it in this really remote park. You'd think they'd want to be in a mall or someplace where there are actually people. So it felt even more out of place.
Because it's a completely ludicrous place to be a delinquent, isn't it?
Yes, it's an odd place to be a delinquent. There's no action. How many people are even in that park? And how many hikers carry anything of value? So that one was hard to endure. But I'm going to leave it at that again because I kind of want to get to the next film.
I'm writing down on my Cliche Squad sheet here. So like the tough mom, who is like her character is tough mom. Yeah, she's a mom and she's tough. Mm-hmm. And like the notion of Ice Cube's son playing a cliche from one of his dad's songs. Yeah. There's also this notion you touched on it earlier about this idea that an older woman exhibiting any level of sexual desire is somehow comic and grotesque. Yeah. That feels like something from the 1980s. Yeah, it's a film set in the 80s, and they don't even capitalize on it, really, do they? Right. Apart from a bit of a pink jumpsuit and a little bit of the soundtrack. Yeah, I feel like there's something missing from that. People go to payphones, which reminded me of our popcorn counter last week. But otherwise, I feel like it could be all sorts of fun stuff to be had from 1985 that we're not using.
Yeah, I think that in hindsight, the nurse mom sort of reflects the Cocaine Bear, right? The protective mother. There's a little bit of that connection, so maybe that. The strong mom makes sense in this film, but it's a cliche. Yeah. All the same, yeah.
And I suppose the Cocaine Bear itself feels like a metaphor for the grotesqueries of the excesses of the film business as well, isn't it? It somehow reminds you of the notion of the kind of coked up producer who's simply utterly unstoppable or unassailable or unreasonable with. True. There's something about this kind of notion of the way that fame draws you in and makes you impossible to tolerate. Yeah. So I'm sure there's kind of an element of that, but it's underexplored. I'm going to flick out one final little fact, which this kind of tickled my fancy, which is that Elsa, the European tourist, she's played by an actor called Hannah Hoekstra, who is Dutch, I think. And I've probably seen her on screen more than I have any of the other actors in the whole movie, because she was the original model for the lead character in a video game called Horizon Zero Dawn. Oh. which I spent about 50 hours playing 3 or 4 years ago. So I've actually I looked at that woman for about 50 hours. It's one of those strange aspects of the video game industry where they get somebody to be the face and the model of the character, but then somebody else has done the voice, and a third person does all the movement, which is mapped onto her.
Okay.
So I think she was paid to come in for a day and get scanned to become the likeness of this main character.
Oh my!
But for the video game nerds, and there've got to be more than just me out there.
Yeah.
That was like a fun little spot there.
Funny. What about the film? I think it's about drugs are destroying America. I couldn't find another theme. That's it. That's all I got. What is this film about?
I think.
Is it about a cocaine
I think
bear?
drugs bad, bears bad, forest's bad, mom's good. I think that's what I took home from it.
Okay, mom is good. I think I've said all I need to say.
I think we've said all that there is to say. I think we have earned a break. Let's go and do a couple of lines. We'll have an ad, and then let's come back and talk about a different view of bears. We're going to talk about the Werner Herzog film, Grizzly Man. We all have problems, and we've all seen the self-help books. But now, the Two Real Cinema Club has come to your rescue with a new self-help book based on the wise advice of one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. Whatever your problem, however big or small, we'll help you by asking, what would Alfred Hitchcock do? Have you been unlucky in love, been swiped left too many times, worried that you're going to grow old alone? Well, Hitchcock has the answer. You need to find a random shop worker who looks a little bit like your heart's desire and then force them to change their hair, their clothes, the way they walk and the way they speak until they look just like the woman that you loved before you saw her fall to her death from a tower. Then, once she catches on, you can chase her sobbing and screaming up the same tower and watch her fall to her death again, finally realizing that you really are going to die alone and every decision you've ever made in your life has been wrong. Do you have money worries? Scared of next month's bills? Struggling with inflation? Well, Hitchcock has the answer. Why don't you just steal a massive haul of cash from your employer and then drive across the country changing cars to evade the police? Once you've run far enough, you can finally relax in a spooky roadside motel run by an odd guy who keeps apologizing for his mother who you never see. But don't worry, he's probably harmless. Don't get on with your neighbours. Perhaps you live in a cramped apartment and they're noisy or inconsiderate. Well, Hitchcock has the answer. Sit by your window and spy on them all day and all night until you think maybe you witness a murder. Then send your girlfriend across the courtyard to break into their apartment for evidence. And if your violent neighbour tries to retaliate, you can just defend yourself with a small handful of camera flash bulbs. You can find all of these solutions and more to everyday problems in our new book, What Would Hitchcock Do? Available from online retailers and all good bookstalls. Whatever the issue, Hitchcock has the answer, and it probably involves terrible advice ending with someone dying horribly. Watch out for our follow-up book, releasing soon, What Would Michael Bay Do?
And we're back. Coming back from the southeastern forests of, where was it? Georgia, Tennessee. We're going to go to Alaska. And we're going to encounter some real bears, none of whom are on cocaine, but many of them have a taste for perhaps human flesh.
Ah, spoiler bell.
I know. Perhaps. I said perhaps.
Perhaps.
Jimmy, tell us about Grizzly Man, please.
So, I'd never seen this film, actually. In fact, this film is directed by Werner Herzog, and I, looking back, realised I've seen very little of Werner Herzog's oeuvre.
Yeah.
So he's, I guess, the most well-known living German film director.
Yeah.
Known for Fitzcarraldo, Aguirre, Wrath of God, Nosferatu the Vampire.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen any of those. I'm so embarrassed now that I have to fess up. In our house, Werner Herzog is known because he had a small cameo in The Mandalorian, the Disney Plus science fiction series, where he plays this kind of slightly crazy, controlling sort of freakish figure.
Yeah.
And it's kind of now, having watched Grizzly Man, I realise why Werner Herzog was cast in that role, because it suits him down to the ground.
Okay.
So, right, let me tell you the story.
Yeah.
Let me tell you the story. So, Grizzly Man is a 2005 documentary by veteran German filmmaker Werner Herzog. It tells the story of Timothy Treadwell, who's a self-styled naturalist who spent 13 years alone in the wilderness of Alaska, living with and protecting grizzly bears. He and his girlfriend Amy Huguenard were killed by a bear in October 2003. Now, we find out this fact about 10 minutes into the film, or less than that, so no spoiler bell for this.
Yeah.
They're very upfront that this is the climax of the story. So they were killed by a bear shortly before they were due to be picked up by their plane. For the last 6 years of his life, Treadwell documented his time with the bears on about 100 hours of video, and it's this footage shot by Treadwell himself that comprises most of the film.
Yeah.
But as Werner Herzog goes through the tapes and he interviews people who knew Treadwell, another story gradually emerges. And that's the story of the film. Now, we'll talk about the story that emerges after the spoiler bell. To kick off the conversation, though, I've got to say I did really, really enjoy this film. I think it's pretty remarkable. It's a fascinating film, and it's not quite the film that I was expecting. So I was kind of expecting a documentary about a guy who maybe ill-advisedly lived with some bears and probably had some scientific research to do and had something to say about bears. And you get to the end of the film and you realise, no, this film is actually about Werner Herzog at least as much as it is about Treadwell.
It is, yeah.
Herzog is he comes across he's a clever manipulator. He's staging these scenes.
Yeah.
He's using real people as actors, though, and then he's kind of keeping the camera running after they've done their little scene to kind of reveal that the whole thing was sort of artificial. He uses Jewel, who's like Treadwell's former girlfriend, who's still alive. He uses like the Alaskan coroner, like both of them, in this way, setting up these little scenes, and then they sort of act out the scene, but they're acting as themselves. And at the end of the scene, they kind of like turn to Werner as if to say, was that all right?
Yeah.
It's all about kind of creating the story and using the myth and the reality and kind of merging them together.
Yeah.
So I think it's fascinating. It's kind of confessional by Herzog. And I don't think he comes across as a nice person. I don't think he cares. But I think it makes for a very interesting bit of film.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And boy, I have a lot to say about it on so many different levels. Yeah, do you want to say any more? Or
the only other thing I was going to say, again, this is before ringing the bell, which is, so the film was made in 2005, and it used this footage shot from 97 to 2003.
Yeah.
And to me, it feels more relevant now than it was even when it was released. Basically, Timothy Treadwell, he is a vlogger before there were vlogs.
Yeah. Yep.
So he is kind of creating this persona. He is staging scenes himself.
Yes.
He's using real footage, but he's kind of making his own cutaways.
Yeah.
And and he does these little scenes where he puts on several different bandanas so that he can use them as cut-ins.
Yeah.
For other days shooting. He's kind of consciously constructing in front of us this kind of persona. He is sort of confessional. He is self-reflecting. He is self-aggrandizing.
Yep.
And today, there are now literally millions of people just like him who are doing their YouTube diaries, streaming their lives on Twitch, creating little highlight reels for TikTok. He was like a pioneer of something which has become almost a social norm.
Yeah.
The other day, someone was showing me medical student TikTok. I haven't got TikTok. Someone at work was showing it to me.
Yeah.
And it's a bunch of different medical students. They kind of dress up in their scrubs and they eat their breakfasts on camera. And then they sort of film themselves walking to the hospital and going into the wards. But obviously they can't film any patients because that's patient confidentiality.
Yeah.
They're sort of creating this largely fictionalized video diary of a sort of made-up life.
Yeah.
Which kind of it both reveals nothing about being a medical student, and yet it sort of reveals everything about the people making the video. I think Treadwell is basically, he's a TikToker from 20 years ago.
Yeah. An influencer almost, right? Like he's
absolutely. And this is kind of his aspiration. Yeah.
And what struck me is how different this would have been as a film if Treadwell were sort of doing it as a vlog, as a film that he made in chapters and released in his lifetime. It's totally different because Herzog ends up co-opting the film and sort of making it his own.
Yeah.
It would have been very different because Treadwell doesn't really, I think he's planning to edit all this sometime later. I mean, he should have probably been editing it after each summer or something like that, but for some reason he's letting it build up, knowing that he might die at any moment, and he's almost leaving it for someone to actually make his film. So it ends up being Herzog making Treadwell's film, and I'm going to argue probably a little later on, I think that Treadwell is the better filmmaker on this project. It's so bizarre, yeah.
That's interesting. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you want to do a ringer bell and do a spoiler, or if you want to get right into it.
It's going to be all spoilers from here on. So let's ring the bell. This is what we bought it for. Ring the bell. So I wrote out some of the things I wanted to say after the spoiler bell, and the first one is just so the thing that is fascinating is it turns out Timothy Treadwell was an actor.
Yeah.
So he had this kind of, he was born in Long Island, got a swimming scholarship to college, injured his back, so he dropped out of college and lost his scholarship, tried to become an actor, he changed his name, he kind of reinvented himself as an Australian. He kind of researched an Australian town that he claimed to be from. Yeah. He developed an Australian accent, or this kind of sort of weird accent that he has, which it's not entirely sure what the accent is supposed to be. He kind of says that he got in trouble with alcohol, and then sort of decided to set himself up as a defender of the bears in Alaska. He does this kind of, I think his parents, aren't they, are the ones who tell this story that he claims that he was almost cast in Woody Harrelson's role in Cheers. So he kind of had this, and again, you kind of think, was that true? Was that not? I don't know. It's this kind of big spiral of self-mythologizing. He utterly remade himself as an actor.
Yeah.
And now he's kind of being used again by Werner Herzog, as an actor after the fact in the film that Herzog is making.
Yeah, and his parents are interesting folks too, aren't they? It seems like everyone Herzog encounters is very, very odd. Those encounters caught on video are odd, and we can talk about that as well. But yeah, it's interesting because it's someone who's actually creating a persona. He's basically creating the character that's going to be in this film that he's making, but it's also just, it gives him a whole new life. And at one point when there's a lot of confessional sort of storytelling in here, and at one point he says, I had no life, and now I have a life, and it's all come from. He's crediting the bears for that, but he's basically created it for himself. And they have this organization called Grizzly People, I think it's called.
Yeah, I think
which is sort of the umbrella group that's sponsoring his trips. He goes into schools. He does some good work where he's sort of teaching kids in schools about grizzly bears, but I don't think he's really teaching them the right lessons. And he's claiming that the bears need his protection, which is completely untrue. So there's a bit of fiction that actually enables his story to come to life. Because they're in a protected area already. There might be minimal amounts of poaching is what they were saying, and there's not too much like environmental degradation in that area. It's a pretty remote area, so there's no reason for him to be up there, and everyone thinks he's crazy for being there because it is crazy to live among grizzly bears. Eventually you will meet that end. There's no question about it. So
isn't it, it's even worse than that, isn't it? Because he's not only is the bears don't require his protection, he's probably actively harming them, isn't he?
That's correct, yeah.
So he's making them get used to the idea of being close to humans, which means then that maybe they will feel more comfortable about approaching other humans, maybe to look for food, and then they'll just get the bears shot.
Yeah.
What he's doing is actively harming the bears.
Yep, he's habituating them, of course, and drawing he claims that because he's becoming somewhat famous or gaining some notoriety, that people are going to go looking for him. So he has this that they want to see him in action or get pictures of him, and that as a result, he says this, and he's kind of oblivious to the fact that, okay, well, if you stopped going there, maybe people wouldn't go there looking for you. But he's saying, okay, this is a problem now because people think I'm famous, they want to be around me, and they want to come, and that's going to harm the Bears. But there's really no self-reflection in that statement. He's a really interesting character. I think one thing that makes this film fascinating to me is I think both of these guys are on the spectrum. I think they both suffer from, and there is some discussion of Timothy Treadwell having some undiagnosed mental illness, probably some sort of manic depression, it seems. And he was,
right, yeah.
And then Herzog, I think, is just kind of autistic. The man has no filter whatsoever, which makes his documentary pretty interesting. He just sort of says it like it is. There are no niceties involved in Werner Herzog's life. So I think they're both on the spectrum. And I think that makes it kind of an interesting film because it's sort of like these two guys unknowingly trotting on each other's lives and absolutely just making this beautiful mess of things. And that was my impression about Herzog in part. But I don't know where you want to go next.
Well, I mean, that kind of Herzog even has, although he doesn't really appear on screen, he has this sort of on-screen parallel character because Amy Hugengard, who's Treadwell's girlfriend, she also, is in most of this footage that Treadwell shoots, but is off camera. Yeah. So she appears almost not at all in the film. In part because her family didn't want to be interviewed, but in part because Treadwell staged his footage to look like he was alone.
That's right.
But actually, he wasn't alone, and he had somebody else. And and there are some shots where there's a handheld shot of him, mooching around with the bears, which clearly demonstrates that somebody else who's holding the camera and pointing it at him. Mm-hmm. She's like this kind of sort of hidden, disappearing figure.
Yeah.
She's kind of supporting him, but getting no credit and getting no recognition.
And Herzog has a throwaway line in there. He says that, first of all, she'd been with him for 2 summers, I think. So the previous summer and then the summer when they died. But he also has this little throwaway line that he was sometimes visited by women up there. So apparently he sort of dated or brought in dates on some of these summer, what did you call them, Expedition 2001? Or, so he's had other women up there too. And there's very little made of it, but it is a throwaway line that Herzog pops in there. And it is kind of funny because in some ways Herzog he's sort of exposing Treadwell. Treadwell is a fraud. There's no question about it. But he sort of kind of invades his life, and he sort of, he outs all of these secrets of Treadwell about the alcoholism and the women there. And so he's sort of telling some of Treadwell's secrets, which makes it uncomfortable at times. This film for me is very uncomfortable, and a lot of it's self-confessional too, because Treadwell's obviously putting stuff on camera for Herzog to use later on unknowingly, but he doesn't know, if he'd made the film himself, he might have edited a lot of these things out. And
I suspect he would.
There are points where Treadwell says some awful things or uses a lot of profanity when you're thinking, okay, a lot of these bits are for him to show to the kids in school or put on their website if they had one at the time. So it's very funny that he's so profane at times when he's talking about the bears and his perceived enemies in the National Park Service and such. But yeah, I think he sort of co-opts Treadwell's life to a certain extent, and it makes it a much better film. But it is uncomfortable to watch at times because his secrets are coming out, and this is all after his death. All these things are coming out about him. It's uncomfortable.
That Herzog kind of provides a voiceover for the film, where he kind of editorializes what Treadwell is doing, and I think that the most kind of revealing little segment of that is some helicopter footage, I think, of going over a glacier. Yeah. And Herzog kind of explains, his kind of point of view about the whole thing, which shows, how they stand at diametrically opposite ends of the spectrum regarding nature. He says that, Treadwell saw beauty and balance like in the bears and the wildlife, and Treadwell is constantly talking about how he loves the bears, and he kind of plays with these little foxes and keeps telling the foxes, "Oh, I love you, I love you."
Yeah. Oh, God.
And they kind of make this kind of again slightly uncomfortable thing about him having a toy bear that he had as a child, and it's kind of portraying him as a kind of quite childlike man. And Herzog kind of says, where Treadwell saw beauty and balance, I only see chaos and violence and nature's deep lack of concern. That for Herzog, the Alaskan wilderness is basically like a cosmic horror, isn't it? It's ultimate physical proof that nature cares nothing for you.
Yeah.
The earth does not nurture you. It does not care about you at all.
Yeah. And that's not new to Herzog. He has a documentary called My Best Fiend about working with Klaus Kinski on Fitzcarraldo, I think. And he talks about how much he hates the jungle. If you see some of his earlier films, it really puts this in perspective, but he just talks about how much he hates the jungle, but he spent a couple of years making several films down there. And it's just a very odd thing. And at one point he talks about how Treadwell sees beauty and harmony, but Werner says, I believe that the common denominator of the universe is not harmony, but chaos, hostility, and murder. That's over the top. I mean, so we were talking about over the top in
that guy's a bundle of laughs, isn't he?
Yeah, he's again no filter and no sense of subtlety there. Werner. But yeah, I think it'd be interesting to watch My Best Fiend if someone wanted to pair this Grizzly Man with an earlier Herzog documentary that's also about a very interesting character, Klaus Kinski, who was an actor, pretty successful actor, and they worked on a number of films together. That would be a great pairing too.
There's a great behind the scenes video, which I'm glad you sort of pointed me in the direction of. It's on YouTube, so you can see the whole thing on YouTube. And nominally, the behind the scenes video is just it's like a 50-minute documentary about recording the music for the film, with kind of Richard Thompson and like a number of other actors. And Herzog basically gets them in front of a monitor and just plays them bits from the film and explains, I want something that's a little bit like this, or something a bit threatening, or and then gets the musicians to sort of improvise over the footage. And when you initially said, you should watch the behind the scenes, I assumed it was just because you really like Richard Thompson and there's some great guitar playing, and there is some great guitar playing. But no, the behind the scenes video of recording the music is like it's another spotlight on Herzog and his sheer weirdness, isn't it?
Yeah.
He is just so similarly manipulating, even here. The musicians sort of devise the music as they go along, but Herzog says this thing, he's looking for the most essential thing, the thing that defines us as human beings. He's sort of like manipulating the musicians in the same way that he manipulates Treadwell's footage. And the survivors are his friends, and like the coroner and all these different people. It's fascinating seeing his process, and it's fascinating that he doesn't mind his process being seen.
He's directing in that session as well, and it's very interesting because he does not have the language to work with musicians. He doesn't know how to talk about music, but he manages. He's telling Richard Thompson is just a brilliant guitarist, and he's really composing on the fly, and it's amazing to see it happen. But at one point he says, it's too melodious. I need space. And he talks about thinking of nature again. He talks about chaotic and finding the balance through the chaos. And oddly enough, and I think it's partly because Richard Thompson's so amazing, he does make a change, leaves more space, and the music is just fantastic. So it's hats off to him in some ways. He chose the instrumentation. It's bass, cello, piano, guitar, and drums. It's not like and I should say double bass. It's sort of like a half orchestra or half quartet, and then and Richard Thompson's playing acoustic guitar, but also electric guitar at times. And they're playing around with the piano and sticking screws and paper clips
screws in it, treating the piano. I've
seen that before, and it is very interesting. But it's amazing that he does inspire this fantastic soundtrack, even though he doesn't really know much about music. He confesses as much in the documentary. But I was also surprised, how much he got involved in it and started directing it and taking over that as well. But I think it's just he's a director. But he also says at one point, it sounds really pompous when you hear it. He says, there's never anything like background music in my films. And then he says, but what can I say? And I think he's saying it because he feels like the music is a character and has a larger role. That's how I interpreted it. Like, music isn't just supposed to be something that you don't hear. And that's why I had to go back and I watched the documentary twice and I watched the film twice because I was really just entranced by the music. And it really makes sense because if you watch the documentary, you see that he cuts out a lot of the music because he's really just cherry picking certain moments that he wants to contrast with quieter moments. So he doesn't use that much music really, but when he uses it, it's very well chosen and very well placed. So I would say I think the documentary is a must see as well. I watched it on DVD, so I was able to get the bonus features easily. But it's called In the Edges, I believe, right? And then I think you can get it on YouTube.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. Herzog says this quite interesting thing, like towards the end of the documentary, he's really admiring the cellist, and he was saying, I would give 10 years of my life to learn to play the cello half as well as that.
Yeah.
And I was kind of thinking, well, actually, Vern, if you got lessons for 10 years, you probably could learn to play the cello, actually. It's not impossible. It's not beyond the bounds of possibility.
Yeah, you don't have to give up your life for it, yeah.
Exactly.
Put in the hours. So a couple of ideas. Some of my bigger ideas here are there's a lot of delusion in both Timothy Treadwell and I think in Herzog as well. And I think it really makes for good film. It's storytelling. And I think to a certain extent, both Treadwell and Herzog are bullshitters. And I think that Treadwell definitely, and I think they both are. But bullshitting is good storytelling. It's just inventing these fictions. And for me, that was such a relief because I've been a bullshitter for so many years. And all this shame was just lifted from my shoulders. And I realized, this makes for good filmmaking. So, there's a certain amount of lying or deception involved in filmmaking. Sadly, I think the delusion is real for Timothy Treadwell. I mean, he feels like he's a hero. He feels like he's a filmmaker. He feels like he's an actor. And, he's some of those things. But I think his entire being and his mental health is predicated on that. And also he puts himself in danger to turn him into those things. So I think that's really interesting to me that they both have a tenuous grasp on reality, really. But that makes them good filmmakers.
I mean, Treadwell kind of comes across as having a bit of a death wish because he often repeats how likely he is to be killed by a bear, and he kind of keeps saying, I'm putting my life in danger. They could kill me. They could kill me like that. Any moment now, they could kill me. They could kill me. And he kind of repeats it again and again and again, like he's almost willing it to happen.
And it's it's an autobiography, but it's also an autobiography that's sort of setting up his death, which is really, again, uncomfortable. That this guy, because they tell you pretty early on that he died out there. I mean, that he's going to die, and it makes the whole film kind of menacing and uncomfortable. I loved being uncomfortable watching this film. I saw it twice here this week, and then I've seen it, I think 2 more times over the last 15 years or whatever. So it's definitely it's must viewing. But I would like to talk a little bit about the filmmaking too, because there's something odd about Herzog's filmmaking here, and I think maybe you and I have a different impression of it. I felt like he was like in the Edges, in the music documentary part. I felt like he was directing they're not actors, they're real people. He was directing the people in this film in a very strange way, that it's not exactly cinema verite, because he's not just a fly on the wall catching footage. It's we have to talk about the coroner. I think the coroner is such an odd character. And it just made me feel like Herzog is not the better director in the 2 films. I feel like Treadwell's footage is fantastic, and Herzog doesn't have a film without Treadwell's footage.
That's true.
And Treadwell doesn't have a film, obviously, without Herzog. So there's this very interesting relationship between a dead man and Werner's getting old, but he's still alive.
There's
this interesting, It's an interesting relationship between them, and I think this is probably Herzog's first thing on video too. Like, his footage is shot on video. He didn't shoot on film, I don't think, which matches Treadwell's filmmaking, which is also probably on a video camera, of course. So it looks kind of weird. It sounds kind of weird, and his camera work is really. It's not beautiful. He's not using, tripods all the time, or tracking shots or anything of that. But he's also not using a a tripod often enough, I don't think.
Yeah.
But it's working with real people, which he probably doesn't do a whole lot of time, and I should say non-actors. His directing is really strange because everyone feels very stilted, like they're trying to act for like a narrative film director where he's doing a documentary. And I think he got lost in the program, in the mission a little bit. Did you get that sense that the actors came off as being less real because they were acting up a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's like a couple of scenes that really stand out as being unreal. There's the scene where the coroner, he still has Treadwell's watch, and he gets it out of this drawer, and it's sealed in this kind of evidence bag, and he snips open the bag because he wants to give it to Jewel, isn't it, who's the ex-girlfriend?
Yeah.
And so this is almost like a little ceremony, and he has something to say, but it feels a little bit kind of stereotyped, and it doesn't quite make sense what the coroner says. Something to think about, I want you to have it. It's it's evidence, but I'm going to take it out of this bag. I want you to have it because you should have it. Or something.
Yeah.
And then she puts it on, and she kind of says, "Oh, it's still going, and she shows it to the camera. And then I think what's really impressive about Herzog is the way that he edits these scenes.
Yeah,
because they have this little exchange, and then. Jill just kind of sits there, and it's like the scene is over.
Yeah.
And they're waiting for Herzog to say, cut. Should we do that again? I've got another evidence bag. We'll do another version.
Yeah.
But like you said, the whole thing kind of just goes still and flat.
Yeah.
And then after that, she sort of bursts into tears, and it's like this sudden moment of going from being a little bit actorly and a bit fake to then suddenly having a tiny little crack of realism appears.
Yeah.
He does a similar thing when the pathologist, the coroner, is talking about how the bodies were retrieved and how it was that they died, and he tells the story directly to the lens of the camera.
Yep.
While kind of Herzog presses the camera closer and closer to his face.
Yeah.
Then after he's finished telling the story, Herzog just sort of steps away, just lets the pathologist just sort of stand there and
awkwardly
kind of stand there in silence again, like they're waiting for a cut or something like that.
Yeah.
It just gives the tale this very kind of spooky, sort of false atmosphere. It's very interesting filmmaking.
Yeah, and I find all of those scenes are cringe-worthy. I just was sitting there so uncomfortably cringing because I think what was happening was Herzog was sort of matching Treadwell because everything Treadwell does is quite staged, right? It's all persona,
right,
it's all fake. And I feel like he almost directed these non-actors, these people who were real in Treadwell's life and in his story, and they start acting a little bit too. And it's matching his film. He's using video and he's also using non-actors, but he's having them act a little bit just the way Treadwell did all those things. And it makes me uncomfortable at times because it is cringeworthy, and I just feel like they weren't treated authentically somehow. They were actually treated as characters in a Herzog film, and I think that was the wrong approach. It struck me as being very strange, and of course the coroner's not blinking at all, so you start thinking, is this man real? Because he gives a very detailed analysis of how they died, and sort of creates a story from the remains that he's found. And there's this audio that we haven't mentioned about Treadwell had to turn the camera on when the bear that killed both him and Amy, he put the camera on he had left the lens cap on, so it was just audio. But there's basically an audio recording of them dying, which Herzog does not use tastefully.
Surprisingly, yes.
Yeah, but it's just such a real experience, and it almost does a disservice, I think, to those people and maybe to Treadwell's story, that it gets acted up a little bit. And that's why I think that Treadwell was really out there in the wild he was doing some filmmaking, sort of editing in his camera a little bit and creating footage. And he's got some beautiful shots of beautiful wildlife shots. The sequence of the two bears fighting was just another uncomfortable moment because this is nature. And he always thinks of the bears as being these sweet things that are threatened and all that. But then he sees two male bears just fighting nearly to the death, certainly to exhaustion. You see pieces of hair just popping off. I mean, it's amazing photography, claws in bodies, brutal. And one mouth biting another mouth. You think someone's going to lose their head in this battle. And Treadwell has lots of that. He has lots of great footage. So it just seems kind of odd that Herzog takes that great footage and in some ways, I don't know, demeans or degrades it a little bit by sort of forcing his own fictional bits into the story, or what seem like fictional bits.
It's like a different kind of fiction, isn't it? I do think this film Grizzly Man is a more effective horror film.
Oh, yeah.
The comedy horror of Cocaine Bear.
Absolutely.
By Country Mile, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'll do a synthesis. We'll try and kind of bring the two films together. But before we do, we need to play our favorite game. Blatantly stolen from another podcast.
Yeah.
Let's play Who Am I? Who am I? I can't even remember who usually goes first. Do I not usually make you go first, do I?
Yeah, but I have been making you go first of late. I think you have to go first. I don't know who I am.
I'm going to go
I don't
first.
know who
Okay.
I am in this film. Go ahead.
At least there are loads of characters to choose from.
That's
I'm
true.
not sure I felt convincingly like any of the characters in Cocaine Bear, because I'm not sure that many of them really were characters.
Yeah.
I don't know if I give myself too much credit for saying I don't feel like a two-dimensional cutout.
Yeah.
I did feel when I was watching Grizzly Man that the guy who is the pathologist and the coroner for Alaska, I felt like I could easily see myself doing the same thing.
Yeah.
That I've been involved in a few gruesome things, from doing shifts on sort of ICU and working in the emergency department, things like that. Yeah. And I could easily imagine some Herzog figure approaching me a couple of years later and saying, "Oh, remember that car crash? Would you just tell me a little bit about what happened and what and what the treatments were when you made it down to the emergency department?" And I can easily imagine myself giving exactly the same unblinking, slightly dramatic, overemphasized performance, moving my hands around and trying to paint a little picture, and then staring blank-faced at Herzog at the end and asking him, "Was that good? Do you want me to do it again?" I could just see myself being manipulated by Herzog exactly the same way that guy was.
Well, you've got the medical credential there to help you find the character you relate to. For me, I think most closely, there's so many bullshitters. That's what I like about these two films. It's easy to relate. But I think there's Henry, the little boy in Cocaine Bear, who sort of gets in trouble, and he's bragging about having done cocaine on the street, and then that coaxes his friend to literally eat a knife full of cocaine or something like that. I think I related to him the most because I liked his he had this lovely honesty, but buried beneath a nice full layer of absolute crap, and he survived. That was good. It was nice to see that certain characters survived that film. So I'm gonna go with Henry. I thought he was kind of bright, but risky and full of it. So
he was definitely the best character in the film.
I think he was the best character. Yes. Yeah, so I think I'm going to go with him. Yeah, but I'll tell you, there's one character in the Herzog film which I just want to mention quickly because he's someone I did not like and I would not want to be like, and that's Tim's actor friend. Do you remember this guy?
Oh yeah, because that guy was so slick.
But he's like the worst actor. I actually went up and looked at him in IMDb. It's funny. He does have some credits, like one appearance on 3 or 4 different shows. So he made one episode in a couple of series like Law and Order and such. But he just it was funny because he's the one person you'd think would act well for Herzog, but maybe he's just a terrible actor to begin with. But he was really unlikable, and then he really says some very disparaging things about Tim and his hair, and and his accent when he knew them, and it was just. He just did not come off as a very nice guy. And this was the one friend that they tracked down to interview. Yeah. And he was terrible. He just didn't work.
No wonder Treadwell ran away to Alaska every year. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was another thing where I felt, oh, God, Werner doesn't know how to direct non-actors somehow. But that was an actor, so that's why I really came off as being. I felt like the less authentic filmmaker of the two. I really liked. Like Treadwell, I find uncomfortable too. I didn't like the way he was with the bears. How he would sometimes he'd have to yell at them and scare them just to be mean to them. But then he'd be saying, "Oh, I love you, I love you, I love you." He had this schizophrenic approach to them, and really overinflated his own sense of importance out there as their ally. So there are a lot of there are not a whole lot of characters to like this week, I don't think, but there are some puzzling people.
Yeah, and there are some believable, realistic, actual characters.
Yeah.
In one of the films, at least.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pull the strings together. See if we can kind of draw the two films into the same wheelhouse. Does that mean something? Wheelhouse? Yeah. Maybe I'm not completely sure what a wheelhouse is, but I've said it now.
I feel well, we're going to stick with it. But a wheelhouse for me is like a zone of excellence for oneself. If you say it's something that you do well or something that you do often, that's your wheelhouse.
Right, so I've used that word completely inappropriately.
But I'm letting you get away with it. I love it because it's appropriate here because I don't think anyone is in their wheelhouse in either one of these films, and I think that
so it's just you and me alone in the wheelhouse. So these are two films about bears. I wrote a little paragraph here. So, like,
please.
Surprise, surprise. Oh, look, they've got something in common. And, like, both of them are kind of using the bear as a stand-in for something else, I think, like for forces that cannot be controlled or reasoned with. That's what I put in my notes.
Okay, that's nice.
So, like, so in Cocaine Bear, the bear is like a metaphor for drugs and for that kind of raging, uncontrollable power of addiction. Although it kind of fluffs the metaphor, I suppose, by suggesting that, like, in the end, it's only people who deserve it will feel the wrath of the bear. Whereas, actually, I think the raging, uncontrollable power of addiction has no favourites.
Yeah.
Whereas in Grizzly Man, like we said earlier, it's like the narrative is like a fight between Herzog's version and Treadwell's version, isn't it? Between making the bear a metaphor for kind of like a love story for nature and for majesty and order and balance. And on the other hand, you've got Herzog's view where the bear is a metaphor for nature as the ultimate disinterested force, the kind of cosmic horror that I was talking about. So it's they're both films about bears, but they're both films using bears to mean something else.
Yeah, I agree with you. I am loath to compare Grizzly Man in any way whatsoever to Cocaine Bear. But I think I think the obvious connection is the bear, but I think the bear stands for something that we shouldn't be messing around with. And it's simplistic to say, drugs, you don't mess around with drugs, you don't mess around with bears, but I think it's more of a nature, perhaps in both films, it's more knowing our own boundaries, knowing our own limits and staying within our lane. There's another expression, wheelhouse, or staying in your own lane, which is kind of like your own wheelhouse. Yeah. So there, we're bringing it back together. Lanes and wheelhouses. And yeah, both films sort of go to places where we don't really need to go. That's one interesting thing for me. Like, there's no reason to stuff up a live bear with cocaine and watch it kill a bunch of people. And there's no reason to go up to Alaska and get yourself killed by a bear either. So I think they go places where, like, environmentally speaking right now, we're not supposed to be messing around with wildlife or messing around with the planet. So there might be a message there. But as I said at the beginning, I don't really want to give Cocaine Bear too much credit, whereas I do want everybody to go see Grizzly Man, watch the bonus features, go back and see My Best Fiend, which is Herzog's film documentary about his work with Klaus Kinski in the jungles, because they are really interestingly similar. And that might be, I don't know how this project fell to Werner Herzog, if he sought it out, or if someone said, hey, Werner, this is the film for you. But it is a match made in heaven, and the Richard Thompson soundtrack with the other musicians is also a match made in heaven. So it's a must-see.
Yeah, it's a great film. There's one other kind of parallel that I will just kind of draw, which is that you're the one who suggested this pairing, and it is a great pairing because I think they illuminate each other very well. Mm-hmm. When you first suggested it, I thought, well, here we go. So we have, a dramatic fictional movie and we have a documentary. Let's compare them. But actually, these two films are, I would say, they are exactly as fictional and exactly as real as each other. Because Cocaine Bear is based on this slightly apocryphal true story.
That's right.
But this true story, which is summarized entirely in the two words, has been adapted to fit the screen, whereas Grizzly Man is kind of like exactly the same. It's sort of based on a true story, but that true story has been kind of bent and twisted to fit into the frame of a video camera. Yeah. They both contain about the same amount of truth and about the same amount of invention and illusion, I think.
Yeah.
This notion that there is a dividing line between documentary and fictional filmmaking is just false. Yeah. There is no difference. There just isn't.
Yeah, and one thing that really struck me about Grizzly Man was the amount of structure. He really puts in a lot of structure. There's definitely a 3-act structure to that film. The end of Act 1 is this scene where Treadwell is swimming, and he's swimming out to greet a bear, and the bear sort of goes by him, but then turns around quickly and nearly attacks him, or definitely puts Treadwell in his place. And then you talked about the backstory. We get the origin story in the second act, and then we really get into the real meat of the story and the death story, I guess, of the two characters in that third act. And it's just, it's really well done, but it's structured. It's definitely Herzog putting some structure onto that film. But what you said just before, that was just great work, Dr. Razika. I mean, I couldn't have brought those two films together, period, and you did it beautifully.
That's me in my wheelhouse there.
There you are.
Polishing my wheel, or whatever it is you do in a wheelhouse.
You wheel stuff. You found your wheelhouse.
Wheeling something to the house? I'm not sure how it works, but yeah. Okay, we have just enough time to talk about also playing at this theatre. And I feel like I always go first. I'm going to force you to go first on this one.
Okay. One thing I also playing, I think before we talked about it a lot, I definitely consider In the Edges, the documentary about the music making on Grizzly Man. I chose that as one of my films, so
yeah,
I just want to push that as much as possible. Yesterday at the Museum of Art here, I saw Close, which was a Dutch-French co-production, and it was the representative of, I guess, maybe the Netherlands for the Oscar Awards as Best Foreign Film. It lost, but I thought it was great. It's a super film. It's almost perfect, really. And it's about two boys. They're sort of right there's, I don't think there was tulips, but sort of a flower growing area, I think, of either France or Holland. They're sort of going to school and learning Dutch there, but a lot of the kids speak both languages, so it's sort of a multilingual thing. Best buddies. They're sort of perceived as being a young gay couple, and that really sets things into motion, and there's some terrible tragedy, but some brilliant filmmaking. I thought it was brilliant. I loved this film. I would definitely recommend it to everyone. It was very smart and just a lovely film. I think it was a little too long towards the end, and the final confrontation is a little bit delayed too much. I think they could have made it a little bit tighter, but very few missteps in this film. I thought it was fantastic, so I definitely want our listeners.
Good enough that I think we'll be covering it in a future pod, won't we?
We're definitely thinking about it. I won't be able to remember it enough, so you'll probably have to take the lead on that one. But
okay, I've got it on my list here.
But I think you'll like it. And then I saw a film last night at a gallery here that shows some interesting films called Godland, which is an Icelandic-Danish collaboration. Kind of intentionally epic, beautiful landscapes of Iceland. It deals with a Danish priest, who decides to, instead of sail directly to Iceland, he sort of sails to one coast and then crosses overland. And it has some amazing experiences along the way. Because he's been sort of tasked with building a church in a very remote village. And he's a photographer, so for some reason he takes along this large format camera. And it's based on a true story where the priest actually finished, or finally, I guess, exposed or developed 7 slides. So it's based on these 7 slides that this photographer took, and they were discovered. And then I think around that, they've built up this wonderful narrative story around him. But it is 2 hours, 23 minutes. As I said, kind of intentionally epic, which means too long. I think that's what epic means. It's too long. Big landscapes and long films are epics. But good. I think if they'd trimmed a half hour, it would have been, again, brilliant.
To contrast, we watched, and I put a bit about this on the blog, Ratatouille, which is
classic. It's a good film.
Yep, short, pert, full of energy. Pixar movie from 2008, I think, directed by Brad Bird.
Yeah.
Here's a film that he made before The Incredibles, which which is one of the movies that is in my top 10. Okay. Though one day I think I will compile that top 10, because I think there's at least 30 or 40 movies in it. Ooh. But yeah, Ratatouille, a lot of great fun. Movie made by people who love food. Yeah. That movie loves food. And interesting, this is the thing I put in the blog, that my first ever job was in a local steakhouse in the village where I grew up.
Yeah.
So I worked in a kitchen. That was like my kind of first job. I was a waiter, and I worked behind the bar, but I would also kind of clean the dishes. And Ratatouille has a great little thumbnail portrait of life behind those swing doors.
Oh yeah,
that just feels really quite authentic.
Yeah,
the curious mix of characters you get working in a kitchen. It's very well made. It's a lovely film.
Yeah,
very enjoyable.
I saw that on a bus ride. I remember being very impressed with Ratatouille, and it fit in the bus. The bus ride's like 2 hours exactly. So,
and you got off the bus starving, hungry.
Oh my God, yeah, it's a good food film. Would have been good with The Menu or Babette's Feast, actually.
Yeah. Not nearly as much murdering in Ratatouille. Right. Next week, we are going to talk about cocaine, I believe, when we meet up at the popcorn counter.
Yes, please, yes.
Which is one of those things that features very rarely in films. But I tell you, if they start serving cocaine at the popcorn counter, a lot of these films, Cocaine Bear would have seemed like a lot better film. And then the week after that, we're back with some Netflix science fiction craziness. So join us for cocaine, and join us for science fiction, and we will see you next time.